Hi, all. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited to be here with you all. My name is Molly McGrath. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the senior campaign strategist and advisor. I'm a voting rights advocate, an organizer, and lawyer, and I work at the ACLU's National Political Advocacy Department, and I lead our voting rights campaign work across the country. Here at the ACLU, we work to expand and protect the right to vote. We are working in our state houses, in our national capital, in the courts, and in the streets. This work includes challenges to gerrymandered maps that are attempting to disenfranchise Black voters. It includes efforts to block access to the vote through voter suppression that we are fighting back against. And it includes our work on some of these structural barriers that are just led by anti-democratic forces. And today, we are going to talk about just how steeped some of these anti-democratic forces are and these structural barriers are in America's history. And I'm so excited to be joined by Maximina Giuson, the director of this powerful new documentary, One Person, One Vote, that we were all just lucky enough to be able to view. So welcome, Maximina.
Thank you.
I
Thank
feel
you
like
so much.
I should put up my applause
Oh,
emoji to welcome you. Thank you. Folks, this is a real honor for me to have this conversation. Maximina is an award-winning content producer. She's based in Los Angeles. She does multifaceted artist work, and she's a successful entrepreneur. She has a long list of accomplishments, including in this is Mama Bears, another documentary film, Harlem Rising that she did for the Harlem Children's Zone, and a video web series for the Washtenaw ID Project. So this latest documentary, One Person, One Vote, is really, an illuminating documentary that examines both the long and contentious history with the Electoral College and contemplates where democracy goes from here. Does the system really allow for one person to equal one vote in America when we select our president? And now that we are officially in 2024, spoiler alert, this is an election year. We are selecting our president this year. This film and this discussion could not be more timely. So, Maximine, I have 100 questions for you, but but I can't do all of
I'm
them.
ready.
Yeah, but let's start. I'm just curious to kind of start at the beginning and how this project, how did this come about? How did you have this idea? Was there, ever kind of that light bulb key moment that led you to the project, or what was the origin?
Yeah, first I want to thank the ACLU and your team for inviting me to participate in this Q&A. I've been a huge fan of your work for so long, and this is a huge honor for me to participate to talking about this film in such a very important year. But getting back to your question, how did I come to make a film about the Electoral College? Well, that's a question that I get all the time, even from other filmmakers. And, when I started researching the Electoral College, the more I learned, the more shocked I became. And honestly, I'm really surprised that a film about how we elect the highest official in our land hasn't been made already. But, my answer is simple. It's how we elect our president. And that's how I came to make this film. And I feel it's really important that we as a country and an electorate understand how it works.
Can you kind of discuss how you approached that educational component to the film to make sure that this was informative too, that folks understood, that exact question and that you answered it for them?
Yeah. So, obviously it's a huge information gap for, the vast majority of Americans. They really don't understand how the Electoral College works. And they don't know why we have it in the first place. So, my first step was to reach out to the top scholars in the country who know about this subject matter. It's obviously a subject matter that ties back to the writing of our Constitution. So I knew that I had to be watertight just in terms of the level of scholarship that went into the film. And also, I wanted to make sure that this was a film for everyone in this country, no matter what side of the aisle they happen to sit on,
Mm.
that I was representing all voices and being that fly on the wall of history, starting from the very day that the Electoral College was created up until today.
And one thing that I really noticed in this film is what a great job you all did in just really shedding light on what is a very opaque process to many, which is the Electoral College. But another thing that it did was not just identify this as an opaque process and show us how it works, but also really revealed some of the very ugly historical roots of the Electoral College, the impact of slavery and race that had on the formation of the Electoral College and continued to have. Can you talk a little bit about why it was so important to include that?
Right. So, in addition to understanding how the Electoral College work, I feel it was really important to understand why we have it in the first place. Because a lot of people don't know that how intrinsically tied slavery was to the creation of the Electoral College. My lead historian actually calls it the driving force for why the Electoral College was created, because at the time we had 3 million people in the United States, as you've seen in the film, and almost a third being enslaved. And, the southern states went into the Constitutional Convention, just really concerned that slavery would be taken away from them. And they wanted to make sure that they had protections in place. And so they wanted to be able to count their large populations of enslaved people without actually giving them any rights in our democracy and in our government. And, that to me is shocking for many people to learn. One of my producers actually is a history buff and a poli-sci major from college, and she didn't know this history, and she was shocked, to learn about it. And it's quite stunning to know that most people really don't know this history. And, especially right now, what's happening in this country, even with our presidential candidates, how, slavery is coming up in the dialogue, and that it's still a reckoning and an acknowledgement that we still are making in this country. And now with the Electoral College and this film, I'm asking people to acknowledge and to promote a national reckoning around how slavery and race shaped our presidential electoral process, also known as the Electoral College.
It's so true that you really did a great job on showing this is more than math of the Electoral College. It is truly something much more ugly, steeped in our history. Can you talk a little bit about, like, from that and its formation to how this continues to affect our representation today and how you took it kind of to the modern conversation?
Right. So, in the film, we go through the whole timeline where James Madison talks about how the big elephant in the room, or the big divide at the Constitutional Convention, was slavery. It was a topic that was discussed every day at the convention. And, there was really, really passionate debates around, you know, counting enslaved people for purposes of representation and the Electoral College. It was, for me in my research, it was really inspiring to see that there were people that were trying to be on the right side of history, like Gouverneur Morris, who said that he could never, approve of slavery being written into our Constitution. Unfortunately, in the end, he had to compromise because the southern states basically, put down an ultimatum that if they didn't get these concessions, that they would secede. And so if it weren't for these compromise, the historians say that we would not have had the country that we would have had now, that it would have been split as a result. But, my lead historian, again, he says that the slavery was the driving force for why the Electoral College was created. And it is a vestige of slavery that still exists today in our electoral process. So, and again, most people don't know that. They're like, okay, well, we have this thing. Why do we have it? Well, you got to go all the way back to 1787 to understand. And then in the film, we draw that line from then to now, how it continues to basically erase, right? If you are in the minority party in a state, then all of those votes get erased. So absolutely, you have ramifications in our democracy today that ties all the way back to the very beginning.
Yeah, erasure is a really great word to describe the through line there. I want to circle back to something you mentioned at the beginning, is that you took kind of this fly on the wall approach. And you really made it a point to show both sides of the debate for those who were, working and for national popular vote, and for those against it who wanted to keep the Electoral College. Can you talk a little bit more about your approach there and why it was important to tell both sides of the story here?
Well, I wanted this film to be for everyone in this country. I didn't want to be a film to feel like it was preaching to the choir. I wanted to hear all voices because, quite frankly, the polarization in this country is so disheartening, the vitriol, and I really wanted to go into the various communities in an effort of understanding and, to serve all of the communities that comprise the fabric of the United States. I mean, that's what we are. We are a nation of immigrants. We are a nation where we have freedom of speech. We're not all supposed to think the same. And so, what can we do to kind of humanize each other rather than see each other as these kind of two-dimensional us versus them? How do we see each other in our full humanity? And, in my representation of all the electors, all four of them in my film, they all have very different views and motivations, and, some of which I agree with and some of which I vehemently disagree with. But I saw them all as humans. And despite, aspects of what they may have said that I disagree with, I still saw them in their full humanity. And I'm hoping that this film allows us to start seeing each other in our full humanity and having really thoughtful dialogue rather than vitriol.
Yeah. And, so here at the ACLU, we have opposed the Electoral College. We've been in opposition of the Electoral College since 1969. So, this opposition has existed a very long time, even before a lot of the current and recent controversies we've seen, where the Electoral College has been in the news so much more, or, every election cycle. And at the ACLU, we take this approach not for a partisan reason or to support one party or the other, but really for democracy reasons. To us, it's a pro-democracy approach. And it's one of those views, that you did highlight in your film. And really for some of the reasons we saw highlighted in the film. And I'm thinking, the different photos back and forth with states. But, what we really see is that under the Electoral College, people in these less populous states have an outsized and disproportionate share of voting power than people in these other states. And, as we think of it, and as you represented all the sides, and how I think of it, at the ACLU, is through this notion of fairness too. And everybody thinks that in their representation of their view that they are on the side that is purporting and supporting fairness. Can you talk about that a little bit and how you saw these different lenses through your film and the work?
Yeah, well, I think the answer to that is very complex and very
I'm here for the tough
multifaceted.
questions.
Yeah. I'm not totally convinced that the politicians I interviewed
Hmm.
didn't have some partisan motivations for their position. But what really sits at the heart of this is, I think, the idea of federal versus state rights. And per the Constitution, state legislations have the sole authority to decide how their electoral votes are allocated. In the very beginning, states voted for president differently. Some states let property owning men decide, and other states, the legislature decided. Ultimately, we progressed as a nation, and eventually each state let their citizens vote for president. But right now, 48 out of 50 states use the winner take all method, while Maine and Nebraska allot their electoral votes by congressional district. So today we still do it differently by each state. And at the end of the day, it's up to us as Americans and everyday citizens to use our voices, to speak up and say what we believe is fair, because change does come from the bottom up, from the people up. And, so I think through this film, I hope to encourage people to organize, vote, and nudge their local legislators to ensure their policies support the majority of our voices and not just the tyranny of a few. With the overturning of Roe versus Wade, for example, and abortion rights getting kicked back to the states, local politics are now more important than ever. And when you think about it, the Electoral College is the root cause as to why we have a Supreme Court that does not reflect the will of the majority, as is evidenced by all the local elections that are voting in favor of reproductive rights. Again, it's going to be up to us to use our voices and use our people power to stand up for what we believe to be fair. Because right now the electorate doesn't understand how the Electoral College works or why we have it in the first place. And this is a huge pain point for us as a country. And, that's why I made this film.
You really thread the needle there of the Electoral College through so many, issues and results that we have right now. And I'm just thinking that, so much of the work that we do of how exactly right this is, in our campaigns at the ACLU, when we want to work to effectuate policy change or, impact results across the country, one of, the very first steps is this public education piece to really highlight the issue, highlight how it impacts real people, so that people care about it and that people are galvanized and motivated to take action. And really, this film is certainly a tool to do that as it relates to the Electoral College. And as a very long, campaigner and organizer, this can be a really difficult step. It's, an essential one, but it can be really difficult. But having a film like this as a catalyst is so impactful. And I'm also wondering, as you were working on this, we saw January 6th. And can you talk a little bit about how that was on the timeline? Was that during your filming, the making, after? How did that impact the film and the timing?
Yeah, I can talk about that. Yeah, but I just wanted to kind of comment on what you're saying about being engaged, the importance of engagement, and
Yes.
how I ended the film with Carol Anderson when she talks about what it means to be engaged rather than disengaged, what it means to like rise all the voices. One thing that didn't make it into the film, she talks about America is a chorus, right? A chorus of voices. And when you're not hearing all of those voices, you're not benefiting from the full totality of what America has to offer. So yes, I am hoping that this film will inspire folks to be engaged, especially as it relates to how we elect our president. But going back to your question about January 6th, how did the events leading up to that, how did that impact my film? Well, so when I filmed on January 6, 2021, I had no major funding. That was before I got the grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. But when I set out this film, I knew that I would follow the 2020 election, and I thought there would be one of two outcomes. Either the Electoral College would match the popular vote, the Electoral College would not match the popular vote and install another runner-up president. I'm like, okay, one of those two things can happen. Like, okay, if that second thing happened, wow, we're going to be in for a ride. But there was no way in a million years that I could have predicted what would actually happen, how the Electoral College would be used to manipulate the presidential electoral process at almost every step, from political operatives getting Kanye West on the ballot in several states to all the fake electors in only the swing states, mind you, right? Which is, again, very Electoral College motivated. The vice president having to make a decision as to whether or not he'd throw electoral votes back to the states, and then providing a venue for the events that occurred on January 6th. And this definitely wasn't in my original outline for the film. It was so surreal for me as a filmmaker who'd been researching the history of this institution for years, and then to be delivered to a moment where the history unfolded before my very eyes while I was filming at the Capitol on January 6th by myself, knowing the contention that the Electoral College has caused throughout history and seeing it bubble to this apex. It was absolutely stunning. Even though the majority of the people there were peaceful protesters, by the end of the day, I had a front row seat to what would be the first non-peaceful transition of power in our country's history. It greatly impacted the direction of my film in this unprecedented historical nature. But it's also consistent with the thesis of the film that the Electoral College has created deep levels of contention from the very beginning until today. And it's again, just quite astounding when you take it all in.
It's almost in the timing you couldn't, I mean, no one was expecting it, but to have been able to capture everything as well. I'm curious too. So from your perch, where you are being so, engulfed in this topic and looking at it from every single angle, from your vantage point, can you talk a little bit about the road ahead? What do you think is next as we're approaching another general election? How can people take action? Tell me what you're thinking from your vantage point, because I agree with you, Professor Anderson at the end, that was kind of like going to church and the idea of,
Yes.
folks taking action with this. So I'd love to hear, what you see as the path from your view.
Expect the unexpected. I mean, all the players in one person, one vote are still at play in this election and still making news. But this time the stakes are even higher. Now that you've seen the film, I'd say educate others. This is a tool and an accessible tool, right? That can be used to educate others and share with others. One factoid that didn't make it into the film is what happens in the event of a tie. If both candidates were to get 269 electoral votes, this would actually trigger a contingent election in which each state gets just one electoral vote, erasing exponentially more votes than winner take all. So Texas, gets the same, with millions of citizens, gets one electoral vote as Wyoming, which has 500,000 people. So it gets even less democratic. And so, my advice is to mobilize locally, mobilize nationally, but locally, don't underestimate the power of local politics, because they are more important than ever. For example, whether or not you like Lauren Boebert, the film contains her origin story. She's a model of how she took local grassroots organizing to a national stage. And so, I mean, it's quite quite amazing, to see that story actually happen, within the film. But as far as the national popular vote, Michigan is now a strong focus for the national popular vote because the bill has recently passed in the House. So there's a lot of movement there happening. And also Nevada is showing a lot of activity around the national popular vote.
It is there. It's exciting to see some good momentum happening with national popular vote. We should be excited. We should continue to watch this. I know, our affiliate folks in Michigan have urged their members to call their reps and support passing national popular vote and making that happen, this session ahead of the election. Max, I want to thank you so much for joining us, for sharing this film with us, for giving us, early sneak peek in this. I really appreciate your work and appreciate so much this conversation, and especially, encouraging folks to get involved and do, I always say there's something to do right in folks' backyard, just as you said, there's, get involved locally, right?
Absolutely.
And everybody, I want to thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation with us. We are now in 2024. It is a huge election year. Our team here at the ACLU, we're working to protect and expand this right to vote. And we want to also make sure in this election that every eligible voter can vote and that vote is counted and honored. But we cannot do this without any of you. So we want to thank you all, first of all, for your support. Thank you for all the support that you give us to do this incredible work and this important work. And also, if you want to join us and join these volunteer efforts, please join us. You can sign up at peoplepower.org. Again, thank you all for just being critical allies and accomplices in this fight. Maximina, thank you for your work and providing us this incredible tool to galvanize supporters and organizers around our democracy.
Many thanks to the ACLU for all the critical and important work you have been doing for many decades. And also thank you all to everyone who is watching the film today and also watching this Q&A.
Thanks all. We'll see you soon.